This here is a red-eyed tree frog, and in today's video we're going to go over everything that you need to know in order to care for a red-eyed tree frog, but also we're going to go over everything that you're going to need in order to create a thriving enclosure for your pet red-eyed tree frog. So let's begin the video. Now, to begin with, red-eyed tree frogs are hands down one of the easiest species of frogs that you can actually care for. They make extremely great pets, especially if you're a beginner and have never kept a reptile or amphibian before. These beautiful tree frogs are native to the rainforests of Central America, and they have so much personality to them. But also on top of that, what makes them absolutely incredible is their beautiful red eyes. They really pop out, and in my opinion, the red-eyed tree frog is one of the best amphibians that you can actually keep. And unlike other species of frogs, these guys don't need as much heat, but we'll get more onto that in a minute. So to begin with, let's discuss their enclosure sizing. First of all, you're obviously going to need an enclosure to actually house your frog in, and depending on how many frogs you choose to keep within an enclosure will depend on the size of your enclosure. A 45 by 45 by 60 high terrarium is going to be perfect for housing 2 adult red-eyed tree frogs. So if you plan on having 4 frogs, I would recommend a 90 wide by 45 deep by 90 high enclosure. Now, for baby and juveniles, you can start them off in the 45 by 45 by 45 terrariums and then upgrade them to a bigger enclosure later as and when they grow. Or you can go straight in for the adult size enclosure. There's no real right or wrong here. But like I say, if you do plan on keeping a few tree frogs together, then be mindful on what size enclosure you go for. You want to make sure that they're... You're going to want to make sure that they're going to have enough space to move around and also move away from one another. So just be mindful of this. If you plan on just keeping the one frog on its own, that is also fine too. And if that's the case, I would just recommend getting the 45 by 45 by 60 high terrarium, because this is going to last its entire life. So once you have your enclosure, the next thing that you're going to obviously need is a suitable substrate. Now, I will be completely honest here. I have personally found that red-eyed tree frogs and a lot of other frogs do so much better when you give them a bioactive enclosure. I find that they just thrive a lot more. So personally, I'd highly recommend going bioactive with your enclosure setup. But also, going bioactive, not only is it going to allow your frog to thrive a lot more, it's also going to help retain humidity for a lot longer. So how do you go bioactive? Well, in order to go bioactive, you're going to need to start with a drainage layer. So I would recommend using these clay balls. Habitat have their own version, and also ProRep have their own version. Either or is going to be perfectly fine for this. So once you have your drainage balls, simply just add this to the bottom of your enclosure. And then after you've added your bio balls, the next thing you're going to need is a drainage barrier. Now, a drainage barrier basically just separates the drainage balls from the actual substrate itself. So again, just simply place this on top of your bio balls, and then you can add the substrate afterwards. So for the actual substrate itself, you could either use the Arcadia Earth Mix or even the Jungle Bio by Habitat, and also ProRep make a pretty good version, which is the Forest Life, and I'm also dead sure that Exoterra do a version too. And once you've chosen which substrate you're going to use, just simply add this on top of your drainage layer, and this is virtually the substrate done. Now, once you've actually added your substrate in, the next thing that I'd recommend doing is adding some sphagnum moss to the substrate. Now, you can either mix this fully into your substrate, or you could just create like a carpet of it on top of the substrate. Either or is going to be perfectly fine. I'd highly recommend adding sphagnum moss. Sphagnum moss is going to also help retain that humidity for a lot longer, so it's also going to be great for this too. Now, once you've done your substrate, I would take the opportunity to now add some springtails and isopods. Springtails and isopods work extremely well as a cleanup crew, but also they're going to help keep the enclosure fungi and also mold under control. But on top of that, everything that your springtails and isopods consume is going to basically feed back to the substrate and provide nutrients to all your plants within inside your enclosure. They're a huge benefit to any ecosystem, and I'd highly recommend adding them. Once you've added your springtails and isopods, the next thing that you're obviously going to want to add in is actually decor itself. So obviously, like we've already mentioned, I'd highly recommend going bioactive. So I'd highly recommend adding live plants into your enclosure. Just simply plant them into your substrate, and over time they're going to grow taller and provide lots of different hiding areas for your pet red-eyed tree frog. If you want a plant of recommendation, I'd highly recommend pothos. On top of that, you can add in things like branches. I personally would recommend cork branches or even cork tubes. And also you can get these jungle vines. These work really well too because you can bend them to however you want them inside the enclosure. And your frogs are going to make great use of them. You really want to fill this enclosure out. You want lots of climbing areas and lots of hiding areas. You'll mainly find that your frog will use the plants as cover to hide themselves or blend into. You can really get creative here and make it however you want. On top of this, I'd highly recommend adding leaf litter to your substrate. Not only is this going to look aesthetically pleasing, but it's also going to help retain humidity for longer, just like the moss. But on top of this, it's going to be a perfect food source for your springtails and isopods. And last of all, I'd highly recommend adding a small water bowl. Personally, I'd try and refrain from adding a too big of a water bowl. You want the water bowl to be big enough that your frog can basically get in and out of it. Like I say, it's just an area that they can go to have a soak during the night time. But I'd highly recommend adding a small water dish. Now, since we're on the topic of water, let's move on to talk humidity, and then we'll go over their temperature requirements. Now, these frogs, like we've already established, they come from a rainforest. However, a lot of people make the mistake of giving them way too much humidity. A lot of people tend to go for 70 to 100% humidity, but I would highly refrain from this. These guys actually come from a semi-humid environment, which means that the humidity will basically fluctuate. They'll have an ambient humidity range, and then there'll be the occasional spike of humidity throughout the daytime. So for their humidity, I'd recommend for the majority of the time keeping the humidity range between 50 to 60%, and then the occasional spike to 70 to 75% humidity. And this is easily achieved through simply just misting down the enclosure each day. By misting the enclosure once a day, you're going to simulate that spike in humidity, and therefore the humidity will go up to around 70 to 75%. Then it'll start dropping back down to the 50 to 60%. So that's basically everything that you need to know regarding their humidity. Now, obviously, you can use a misting bottle just to spray down the enclosure, or you can also get misting systems to do the work for you. The next thing that I'd like to touch on is temperature. So the ideal temperature range for the red-eyed tree frog would be around 70 to 80 Fahrenheit, which is going to be 21 to 26 degrees Celsius. Now, you'll likely find that your home naturally sits within this range, and most people's homes have a similar temperature range to what your red-eyed tree frog would experience inside their enclosure. So therefore, you will likely not need any heating for your pet red-eyed tree frog. The only time that you might need to add a little bit of heating is during the winter months. Like I said, most people's homes are within this temperature range, but if you really do struggle getting this ideal temperature range, then just simply add a small heat lamp with a 35 watt halogen, and this is going to be perfectly fine for your red-eyed tree frog and is going to help keep that temperature at the right temperature range. But like I say, most people will probably find that they don't even need to do this. Now, in order to test your temperature, I'd recommend using one of these infrared guns. Now, this is going to basically allow you to test the temperature around the entire enclosure and not just one specific spot. But I also find that it's the most accurate way of testing temperature. Now, for your humidity, I'd simply just recommend using either the dial or digital hygrometers. Both are going to work just fine to test your humidity. Like I say, it's really not that difficult to actually care for these beautiful frogs. Providing that your temperature and humidity ranges are within these parameters, your red-eyed tree frog is going to live happily and healthily and is going to be able to thrive. Now, going back to their enclosure setup, you're obviously going to need lighting for a day and night cycle. So, to begin with, I'd recommend adding a 15 watt jungle dawn to the top of your enclosure. Now, this is obviously going to provide a day and night cycle for your pet red-eyed tree frog. But the reason why I'd highly recommend adding one of these is because we've gone bioactive. Your plants are going to need sufficient lighting in order to thrive, and they're also going to need a light to promote plant growth. So this jungle dawn is going to be able to do this, but also it's going to really brighten up your enclosure. And like I say, it's going to provide a good day and night cycle for your pet red-eyed tree frog. On top of this, I'd highly recommend adding UVB. Simply just add this 8-watt shade dweller. You can basically use any UVB that goes up to 5 or 6%. And this is going to provide perfect UVB for your pet red-eyed tree frog. I'd highly recommend turning all your lighting off at night time and only keep it on for around 10 to 12 hours throughout the daytime. You can just plug your lighting in on a timer and this is going to do it automatically for you. So that's virtually everything that you're going to need to know. The next thing that I'd just like to quickly touch on is handling. Personally, I'd recommend refraining from just handling them without gloves on. Now the reason being is our skin basically produces oils, which is actually toxic for most amphibians. So that's why I'm wearing these latex gloves today, because I don't want to harm the frog. Like I say, if you want to handle your red-eyed tree frog, just go slow and steady. They don't mind being handled, but I'd highly recommend making sure that you wear some gloves whilst you do so. Now, the only other thing that we haven't actually gone over is feeding. First of all, I'd highly recommend getting some calcium and multivitamin. Make sure that you dust all your feeder insects in the calcium and multivitamin, and this is going to help keep your frog strong and healthy. Now for the actual diet itself, you'll probably find that the main staple diet will be crickets. Just make sure that you feed the appropriate size cricket for the size of your frog. You can also feed other things like mealworms, waxworms, locusts. These are all other options that you can feed to your pet red-eyed tree frog. But like I say, the main staple diet you'll likely find will be crickets. I find they prefer the crickets over the locusts because crickets move a lot more quicker than the locusts do. But that's basically everything that you're going to need to know in order to care for your pet red-eyed tree frog. And you now know everything that you're going to need in order to set up a thriving enclosure for them. Let us know in the comments what you personally think about these tree frogs. Also let me know in the comments if there's any other specific species that you would like me to do care videos on. Make sure to drop us a like if you enjoyed this video to let me know that you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and also follow us on social media. That's it for today's video, guys. I shall see you in the next video. See ya!